Hi, Zissy. Good to see you. How are you?
Okay, doing good.
Right.
I spoke to your mom yesterday.
Yeah,
I know.
she's doing
You
okay.
saw
They started her on oxygen today, hopefully. And it came.
I'll call her tomorrow.
Sticking close to the house.
Oh yeah, right here with mom. Just together.
How's Jean doing?
Oh, she's hanging in there. She loves the attention.
That's a good thing.
I want my time.
It'll come. It'll come. Just got to be patient.
That's right. Guess more people will come.
Well, it's a few minutes early and Jewish time.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think she was hesitant about the oxygen, but I told her, I said, you just try it. See what, it's good. It'll feel good.
Yes. I
And
think
said, you keep reading.
She'll feel better.
Right, I think so too. I told her to keep reading those books on tape.
Yeah, I offered to get her some more.
No, she has some in the drawer. I know where they are.
Okay.
I'll call her tomorrow and get them going.
Let's see who else. Well, see if a few others show up. A couple people said they were coming.
Yeah.
Zooming in. But we don't need a minion.
Takes them a while to drive to their phones. Do it.
How are your siblings doing?
Oh, they're fine. Fred's a little depressed because the motel shut down. So he's walking in circles trying to figure out what to do.
The hotel is closed?
The hotel is not closed, but the restaurant, everything else is closed. Banquets.
Right.
So he's just hanging out. And don't worry about it. Everything will be okay. But he's really has a lot of anxiety letting go.
I'm sure.
He doesn't like to lose their, income. But he was really nice. A lot of the food was going to spoil, so he gave it all to his employees. So the employees had plenty of food to eat. And the rest he gave to the Mandarin Food Bank.
Okay.
So that was good.
Yeah.
So he did a good mitzvah.
Hi, Eva. Okay, we got 3. Let's see who else. Yep, I think we may have 4. Okay. Somebody is on a phone. I'm going to bet it's Gloria Einstein, just from the initials.
Lois.
Hi, Lois. We'll wait another minute or two. While I am waiting with you, if I'm able to share a document online, I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but I'm going to try. If you don't see me for a moment, don't worry, I'm here. Let's see.
You should be able to share your desktop.
Well, let's see. All right, it says share.
Oh, I'm online.
Let's see. Okay. Let's see how this works. Okay. Hold on. 225,900. All right, let me see if this works. Might. Okay. Yeah. .org/sheets. 225,900. Okay. Okie dokie. That. Okay. I am going to see if this works for you guys. I created a study sheet online through a website called Sefaria. It has lots and lots of Jewish texts. Very often we use it and print them out as PDFs and then photocopy them. But we can't do that tonight. So I have a link, and if somebody wants to go on, maybe if you have your phone or a tablet, or in theory, you should be able to at least hear me, even if you can't see me, and you can look at the sheet. But here's the link, and if it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. But it's Sefaria.org. That's SEFARIA, Sefaria.org, /sheets, as in bed sheets, SHEETS, /225900, 225900. And if you can get in, it will say, can community be virtual in Judaism? And have the sources. Anybody achieves success, let me know. Some of you are muted, some aren't. So feel free to unmute yourself if you have been successful. Again, safaria.org/sheets/225900. Lois, are you successful? Wait, I gotta unmute you.
I got, can community be virtual in Judaism?
Yes,
Okay.
you got it.
Yeah.
All right.
So
Anybody else?
there's also a way to share just right on Zoom.
Okay, let's see if I can figure it out. Share
If-
screen.
Yeah, if you want to, do you have it somewhere in your computer already?
Just on Safaria.
Okay, well, you can share your screen and then hit share. Just put under share, do screen and then share. And we should see you will see your desktop.
Wait, I see it says share screen whiteboard.
Yeah, so just hit the share, hit the screen and then hit share.
Yeah, I did that.
Okay. All right, we should be seeing your screen.
Okay, let me try it again. Whoa, let's see. Okay.
Okay, it started screen share. There we go. We got your screen. So now go to it and we'll see whatever you see.
Right now. Okie dokie. Let's.
Somehow I lost.
Can folks see?
Yeah, there we go. You're scrolling through it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see it.
Can everybody see who is able to see?
Yes.
Cool.
There you
Okay,
go.
thank you, Lois.
You're welcome. I've been using Zoom for a couple of years now.
So I'm still a novice.
Well, it's easy to teach from, so.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Okay, so and for those who can't see the screen, the sources, we'll read them. It's just easier to have the visual, and I'm happy to provide anybody who wants the sheet afterwards. We've thought a lot about virtual community. It's kind of a rhetorical question. Can community be virtual in Judaism? Of course it can. We're left right now with the internet as being the only way we can meaningfully form community, and it truly is a blessing. Question is, from the sources, can we create an understanding of community that would allow tradition to sanctify a virtual communal gathering, and specifically for the context of tefillah b'tzibur, public prayer, and more especially prayer in a minyan, because it's very clear that Judaism, not being a Luddite religion, right? We don't reject technology. We view it as a blessing. That Judaism isn't going to reject any way that brings people closer for the sake of observing mitzvot and for the performing of either the study of Torah or those things that enable us to perform any mitzvah, ben adam l'chavero, any commandment that we have between ourselves and other people. But that being said, prayer and congregational prayer stakes a very special place in Jewish life. And with technology, there will be two questions, and we're not going to ask really, except maybe in passing, the second one tonight. And that second one is, of course, what technology, even if we are able to create virtual prayer communities, are there certain technologies that might otherwise be violations, transgressions of Shabbat or Yom Tov? And would they somehow no longer be if they were being used for sacred purposes? The short answer to the latter question is no. As important as congregational prayer is in Judaism, and it's absolutely critically important, there's nothing in Jewish law that would tell you that one can violate Shabbat for the sake of using technology to create that communal prayer experience. Granted, there are different rabbis who will have different views of what one may or may not do, but if on some level virtual community requires one to desecrate Shabbat, the blessing of virtual community still doesn't take precedence over the observance of Shabbat. We are permitted to violate, pardon the pun, virtually every commandment, almost every commandment, for the sake of saving life or potentially saving life. But attending a virtual service on Shabbat, while some might think it's life-saving, very flattering to hear, but it would not fall under the typical definition of pikuach nefesh. But we're really not going to deal with that tonight. We're going to look at what it means to pray together in, if you will, virtual sacred space. So let's look at the very first source, because this is perhaps the most fundamental text for what we will later understand as prayer with a minyan, and the recitation of certain words of sanctification. The Hebrew term is dvarim shebiktusha, requiring a minyan. So for anybody who can see, if you want to unmute, would you like to, somebody want to read from Leviticus 22?
Can you make it a little bigger?
Can I make it a little bigger? Let's see.
Do whatever you would normally do.
Yeah, I'm looking. Sheet layout, format, file, visualize. Maybe this is it. Visualize.
Aha.
Whoa. No, that didn't work really well.
Well, you found big and small, though.
Well, yeah, let's see if I can. Okay.
Just hit a back button.
Let's see, wait, where are my sheets? No. Here we are. Now, let's see if I can. No. It is not.
Okay.
Wonder if. Nope. Yeah, I don't, not sure.
Okay.
How to do that.
Okay. I don't think I can read then.
All right, that's
I was
okay.
going to volunteer, but sorry.
That's okay. I will, I'll read it aloud. Just get back to it. Okay. I have to get into mine. Here we go. Mine. There we go. All right. This is from Parshat Emor. Lo techalalu v'lo techalalu et shem kodshi v'nikdashti. I'll be sanctified. B'toch b'nei Yisrael ani Adonai mekadishchem. You shall not profane my holy name, that I may be sanctified in the midst of the Israelite people. I, the Lord, who sanctify you. Now, in context, this has nothing to do with prayer, and it certainly doesn't mention the notion of a minyan. The idea of a minyan is rabbinic. The liturgy that the idea of liturgical structure is rabbinic, but the idea is that somehow God's sanctification is in the midst of the Jewish people, bitoch, literally, in the middle of them, and that's going to be really a very important phrase. So let's fast forward to the Talmud. And this is from the Tractate Brachot. Many of these sources are. The Tractate Brachot deals with many of the laws of prayer. Okay. Rav Ada bar Ahava stated, from where is it derived that an individual may not recite the Kiddusha alone? Right? And not just the Kiddusha and the Amidah, the context here is the Amidah, but any of the prayers that are designated as Dvarim Shebiktusha, prayers that are meant to sanctify God, and all of which are call and response. Right? These are all prayers that typically they're not recited together. Parenthetically, one doesn't recite Kaddish together. I know in some communities that's what happens, but the idea is that Kaddish is a call and response between the mourner and the congregation, or between the Shaliach Tzibur, the prayer leader, and the congregation, but it's not really intended to be a prayer that is recited all together. The same is with the Kedusha, Baruch Hu, the priestly blessing. All of these things are by and large call and response. So Rav Ada bar Ahava says, from where do we know, what's the source for us that you can't recite Dvarim Shebikdusha if you're alone, right? And lo and behold, he quotes the verse from Leviticus. Any expression of sanctity may not be recited in a quorum of fewer than 10 men, okay? We won't deal with the part that talks about the men. We dealt with that in 2006. We can deal with that again for those who'd like, but that's not this class, okay? Actually, in the Gemara, if it makes you feel better, it just says, Kol davar shebikdusha lo yehe pachot me'asara. You can't recite them with fewer than 10. It doesn't say 10 men, though that is the implication for sure. Okay, my mashma, right? How is this inferred from the verse, right? I understand, okay, you need community to recite certain prayers. How do you get 10? All right, so we've established that there are certain things that can't be said except if they're bitoch b'nei Yisrael, right, in the midst of the Jewish people. But that could be 6. That could be 60. That could be 6,000. So how do we know that it is 10? And this is where, for those who've been in the Talmud class who remember our old friend, the Gzeira Shava, when you have two sources that use the same language, you can learn from the way that a word is used in one place to shed light on another. So the Gemara says, or asks, how is this inferred from that verse in Leviticus? The Gemara responds, this must be understood through a Braita taught by Rabbi, the brother of Rabbi Chia bar Abba, through an analogy, a gzera shava, between the words bitoch and bitoch, right? We have two different texts that talk about among. In Leviticus, it says, I shall be sanctified among or in the midst of the Israelites. You have that same word, betoch, in the midst of or among, regarding Korach's congregation. Ibadlu mitoch ha'edah hazot. Separate yourself from this congregation. Okay, and if you're following along, so now we've established the relationship between bitoch and edah, congregation. And what is a congregation? Just as their betoch, in the midst of or among, connotes 10, so too here, right? Because the connotation of 10 is associated not just with Korach, but the very same word edah is written in reference to the story of the 10 spies. The 10 spies who went out to check out the land of Israel and came back with bad reports. So you have the word congregation associated with 10, and you associate the word congregation, bitoch, in the midst of. Therefore, congregation that God is sanctified through, or God is in the midst of, must consist of no fewer than 10. So that's a very interesting source to use as a proof. Why? Because let's just think for a moment. Who are these guys that are constituting a congregation? Right? They're pretty bad dudes. They're sinners. And edah doesn't necessarily mean that you are holy or sacred. You can put 10 Jews together for a singularly evil purpose, and they are an edah. But that same 10 can be used if, hopefully you're not bringing 10 bad guys together, but you're bringing 10 Jews together. That is a group in which God's name may be sanctified through the responsive, the call and response, through the responsive prayers of that community. In other words, what this source in the Talmud, all it does is prove, and I'm using quotation marks, that a minyan is 10, and that is the minimal number to recite these prayers that sanctify God in the midst of the congregation. 10 good people, 10 bad people, 10 mediocre people, 2 saints, 8 villains. That's irrelevant. We are just defining a baseline of 10. So that comes right out of the Talmud in response to the rabbinic understanding of the verse in Leviticus. So let me just stop here for a second and ask if anybody has any questions so far. We're good? Okay, I mean, folks can unmute if they want or not. But I'm going to go on then with the next source. Okay, so far, the Talmud's understanding of that source in Leviticus is that to be sanctified in community partakes of something special. And you need to have 10 individuals based on this exegesis, this careful reading of the word congregation as consisting of 10 and relating that back to the idea of sanctifying God's name. Okay, the third source goes a little bit further, and not to impute human emotions too much to God, but Rabbi Yochanan suggests that God gets a little PO'd when, if you will, God comes to the synagogue and doesn't find a minyan present, right? And so there is a quotation from Isaiah. God becomes angry, as Isaiah teaches. Why, when I came, was there no one? When I called, there was no one to answer. Behold, with my rebuke, I dry up the sea. I make the rivers a wilderness. So that clearly shows, the rabbinic emphasis on the importance of minyan, right? And for those who, who don't want to get God upset, come to minyan. But I'm not, that's not obviously a legal text. It's not a halachic text, but it shows you how, the mindset of the rabbis and how they understood, right, based on that phrase in Leviticus, "V'niktashti b'toch b'nei Israel," God desires to be sanctified in community. Therefore, when a community isn't present, that could be, and arguably should be, it's a missed opportunity. It may not be a desecration of God, but it is a missed opportunity for a consecration and a sanctification. Moving on to the next source. This is from also the Talmud in Brachot. In the Psalms, we have a verse, "Va'ani tfilati lecha Adonai et ratzon," right? Let my prayer come before you at a favorable time. From Psalm 69. And you may remember, if you have been in synagogue on holidays, V'ani tefilati lecha Adonai et ratzon. So we sing that during the service for taking out the Torah. So what does that mean, letting my prayer come before God at a time of favor? It is a time when the congregation is praying. It is beneficial to pray together with the congregation, right? The rabbi suggests that God is more likely to hear the prayers of the larger community. And then there are different proof texts. We're not going to go over them. Different rabbis have different ways of understanding why God is more likely to listen to the prayers of the community. But there's strength in numbers. One of the interesting arguments is that even if we are not so righteous, by being together as part of a community, our righteousness quotient is enhanced just by the fact that we are there. The bringing together of many different people, as long as we're joining our prayers with those who may have more inspired feelings when praying, though we may not, we actually are connecting with the inspired prayers of others. Right? So there is a kind of inspiration that we can have by being together in community. And I think some of us, will have seen this at one time or another. We see somebody reciting Kaddish with tears in their eyes, or we see another person who's praying, closing his or her eyes, and davening with a tremendous amount of concentration. Those kinds of personal connections with God can actually encompass us as well, being within the space of community. Okay, so now we're jumping to the Shulchan Aruch. And in the Shulchan Aruch, we have the basic physical definition of what a minyan is. Right? The Shulchan Aruch, just as a reminder, is I won't say the last word in Jewish law, because it's not, but it is perhaps the single most important compendium, legal code. It dates from the 16th century, written by Rabbi Yosef Karo, and for primarily Sephardic Jews, but Ashkenazi Jews had a famous rabbi, Rabbi Moshe Isserlis, write what we call a gloss. He incorporated those specific differences in practice with for the Ashkenazi community. Obviously, many things, most things are the same, but where there was a somewhat different emphasis or practice among Ashkenazi Jews, the Ramah, as he's called, Rabbi Moshe Isserlis, added his own particular touch. But here in the Shulchan Aruch, right, culling all of the earlier Talmudic and other rabbinic sources up to the 1500s, said, let's see, here we are, wait. Okay, Shulchan Aruch, Orach Chaim, this is Siman Nun Hey, section 55. Right, Sarich shiyu kol ha'asara b'makom echad, v'shatz imahem. All of the 10 need to be in one place, and the prayer leader with them. Right, so that is to this day, what normatively defines a minyan. 10 people who are in the same place. Right, the shaliach tzibur, the one who stands in the middle of the doorway between a part of the building and outside, such that when one closes the door, one is in a place from the inside lip of the thickness of the wood and outwards. It is like outside. So there's this notion that you really are in the same room together, but there are some exceptions. One who stands behind the synagogue, and in between them is a window. All right, if you can envision this. Right, so somebody is behind the sanctuary, there is a window, and they may even be a couple, there may be a story or two high. And his face is seen by them from there. He joins with them for the 10. Right? Those in roofs and upper stories are not included in the synagogue, and the one who stands on them is not joined to the 10. That is the gloss of the Ramah. But notice here a couple of things. First, the assumption is that most of the people are in the room. But what if you have 9 in the room and you have this 10th who's not physically in the room, but he can see into the room because there's a window, and presumably he can also hear, because if he couldn't hear, then how can he respond? So it's interesting that here the hearing isn't emphasized. We'll see elsewhere where it is, but the sight, he has to be able to see them, and they have to be able to see him. Can that person complete the minyan? Yes. Can that person, if he is the 11th or 12th, join in the minyan that is already present in one place? Yes. Okay, these are exceptions to the rule, but I want to point out that even though normatively 10 people, one place, there are some outliers in terms of situations. Okay, the next paragraph, this is another interesting one. How about if this? A few of them are inside the chapel, a few of them are outside, and the prayer leader is in the middle of the doorway. Now, the folks who are inside the chapel can't see the folks who are outside. The shaliach tzibur, the prayer leader, can see the folks who are inside and the folks who are outside. The shaliach tzibur becomes the joiner of these two groups. Again, we're talking about relative proximity. You have one group, if you can imagine this, out in the hallway. You have one group inside the Witten Chapel. The Shaliach Tzibur, the prayer leader, is standing in the doorway. And because he can hear both, and both can hear him and see him, he becomes the joiner of these two groups, though they are not in the same room. Now, this is not we're not talking virtual, right? This is still the 16th century. The rabbis don't know from virtual, but we are using the sources of the centuries before us to look for parallels or clues about how to apply things in our time when we have certain technologies. Now, the Shulchan Aruch, a little bit later, really interestingly, suggests something else. What happens if you cannot pray with the community? Let's say you're home and you're sick. What do? Well, if you can't pray with the minyan, it is still considered better to pray at the same time as the minyan. Are they able to count you? No. Are you able to, respond to the prayers of the minyan? No. But even when you can't be there, the very fact that you are praying at the same time as the community is considered better than simply just praying on one's own, because it creates a consciousness and awareness of the community. You are still mentally joining your prayers to the community. So even if it doesn't, as we understand it, create virtual community, it certainly is creating a sense that you can be connected with a group of people, even if you're not there. You may be out of sight, but you can be very much in mind, not out of mind. And similarly, interestingly, if you can't pray when the community prays for whatever reason, it's still better to pray in the synagogue, to come and sit by yourself. Why? Because that's the place where the community prays. So the best option, if you can't pray with the community, pray at the same time as the community. And if you can't pray at the same time as the community, at least come and pray in the place where the community was. Okay. A couple of other sources, and then I want to make sure we have time for questions. The next one is from back to the tractate Brachot. All right, and you have two groups of people. Right, this is not minyan per se, but eating a meal, right? And when we do birkat, when we have the grace after meals, what do? We recite, if we have at least 3 people, we recite a special invitation to the grace after meals. If we have 10 people, we add some additional wording to that. So what if you have a couple of people who are over there in one corner of the restaurant, if you will, and a couple of people who are in another corner? Okay. And they decide, you know, we don't have enough people, or we have 5 over here and 5 over there. Why don't we join forces and we can do the invitation for Birkat, the Zimun, with 10? Now, can you do that? You can. You can bring the 2 groups together. What's the only requirement? They have to be able to see each other and, of course, hear each other because they're responding to one another. So here you have 2 groups who are separate, if you will, communities, but they're in proximity. The fact that they are in proximity, even though they could be total strangers, they didn't form a fellowship at the same table. But the fact that they were eating at the same time in the same place and that they can see each other allows them to join together and recite the special invitation to Birkat, the grace after meals, as though they had eaten together. I'm going to share one more source, and then the last one I think is going to be for our situation now with the coronavirus, maybe the most directly relevant. But this is from the Talmud, and it has to do with the mitzvah of fulfilling hearing a shofar. So what happens if you're walking by a synagogue, right, or your house is adjacent to the synagogue, and you're not inside the synagogue? Can you fulfill the mitzvah of having heard the shofar? The same goes, actually, the question with Megillat Esther. I'm walking outside of a synagogue, and I hear the Megillah being read. I'm not in the synagogue. For whatever reason, I didn't intend to go into the synagogue. But do I fulfill that particular mitzvah? And the answer is, it depends. If it was my intention to fulfill the obligation, I'm walking by, or I live next door to the synagogue, and I hear the shofar, and I say, you know, I'm not very religious, but I remember it's Rosh Hashanah, and I want to listen to that shofar, right? So if I am intending to fulfill the mitzvah of hearing it, even though that hearing may have been accidental, at least initially, and even though I'm not physically present in the synagogue, the answer is yes. If, however, I was living next door and I was just, doing chores around the apartment and my window is open and I heard the shofar, but I really wasn't paying attention to it, then no. So the intentionality of the hearing in this case is very important. The fact that I'm not in the building is secondary to the lack of intention. So let me just stop here for a second before we get to the last source. So what have we seen? We've seen a couple of things. Number one, minyan is clearly preferable than individual prayer. And if you can't pray in a minyan, it's better to pray at the same time as a minyan, or even in the synagogue after the minyan, but at least time-wise or spatially to have some connection with the place where communal prayer took place. If we are to be a part of a minyan normatively, you gotta have 10 people in the same place. There are some exceptions where they're not necessarily quite in the same place, but there is still some visual element or some hearing element that enables them to connect with one another. And finally, you may even be in a, in a different place when you hear something like the shofar or Megillat Esther. And there, whether or not you are able to fulfill your obligation will depend on your intentionality. By the way, that's not quite as true if you're inside the synagogue, because presumably if you're inside the synagogue for the sounding of the shofar, that is your intention. You're in there to fulfill the mitzvah. So even if you're not paying so much attention, arguably you have fulfilled the mitzvah, not the best way of fulfilling it, but you have fulfilled it in some bare bones way. But if you're outside the building, then you have to have a specific and separate intentionality that as you now hear the shofar, it's not just a background sound, but you are hearing it as a shofar and you are paying attention to it as such. So here's the last source. This is from a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. Rabbi Chaim Mordechai Margulies. He wrote a commentary called Sharei Tshuva. He lived at the end of the 18th into the early 19th century. And he writes interestingly about a time during some sort of quarantine. Now, in his day and age, people thought very often that illness was caused by miasmas, bad air, right? Their germ theory was primitive, if non-existent. But, certainly the descriptive term of miasma of air is not so far off if you think about viruses that travel, if you're not, socially distancing. So during a case of the miasma of the air, as long as individuals can show their faces from a distance, they may combine to form a minyan. Should a guard prevent people from leaving their house, typo there, but allows them to stand at the doorway and show their faces, right? Then they can form together a minyan. This is all the more so lest 40 days go by without the recitation of the words of sanctification, which typically require a minyan. So for the Sharei Tshuva, the notion that during some sort of epidemic, Jews might go many, many weeks, even months, and not have an opportunity to recite any Devarim Shebikdusha, any of the prayers that normally require a minyan, was something that he found very disturbing. So if you could stand and see each other, and presumably at least some of the people could hear each other, right? Even if all the people couldn't hear one another, at least some of the people could be heard by some others of the people, and some others of the people could hear the prayers of the Shaliach Tzibur. So long as everybody could at least hear the Shaliach Tzibur, even if they couldn't hear each other, they could, in extremis, form a minyan. So as far as we're concerned, and there was a responsum written by the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards of the conservative movement back in 2001 called Wired to the Kadosh Baruch Hu, minyan via internet, and you can look that up. It's, if you just type in those words, Wired to the Kadosh Baruch Hu, minyan via internet, the responsum will come up. And what Rabbi Avram Reisner, who wrote the responsum, determined was that to have a minyan, normally speaking, you needed to have 10 people in one place. However, others who could not participate in the minyan could join via Skype, Zoom, any kind of internet that would allow them to see and hear. And as such, even though they couldn't count toward that first 10 of the minyan, they could still participate fully, and their own obligation, say if they were reciting Mourner's Kaddish, could be fulfilled via their participation in the minyan. If we think about examples of where that might be very helpful, could be helpful with somebody who's elderly or chronically ill, who can't come to services, but can rely on a minyan physically present elsewhere. It could also be very helpful if somebody is in, a part of the world where there is no minyan. The only way you're going to ever daven with other Jews if you live in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, or Iqalut, which is the territorial capital of Nunavut in the snowy, frozen north of Canada, or wherever it may be. It's going to be via internet. Reisner's tshuva, however, doesn't allow for virtual minions. The Committee on Jewish Law and Standards made an emergency decision allowing the recitation of Kaddish in these current circumstances when it simply is impossible for us to put a physical minyan together. Now, that doesn't answer the question of what you do on Shabbat. As I said, that's a separate question. But at least 6 days a week, it does allow us to gather as a community and afford those who are reciting Kaddish, either because they're in mourning or observing a yahrzeit, the sense of comfort and connection. It may or may not be a minyan in the technical sense, but it is a virtual community. And for the sake of saying Mourner's Kaddish, and there are some differences as to which prayers are more easily said with this virtual minyan concept and which less, at least there is some wiggle room. And the very fact that we have the Sharei Tshuva talking about people who could not necessarily be in the same space during a time of quarantine gives us some leverage, as do some of the other sources that talk about the ability to join and participate in services even when not physically present in the same room. There are things that are sha'at hadchak, times of great urgency, where certain leniencies are allowed in Jewish law. And for this, I wholeheartedly think this is one of those times for us. So let me go back to our I'm going to see if I can figure out how to get back to.
Did you want to get out of your screen sharing?
Yeah, I'm gonna wait. Let's see. I'm gonna go with this. Will this do it? I think it will.
Just hit the X on top.
Okay, I'm on share. Hit the X. Oh wait, I see it. Yes. Wait. Let me get rid of this and this. And love to see. Okay, so I'm going to unmute folks, and any questions, thoughts, comments that folks might have about any of these sources or anything that we
Yeah,
were
I had
studying?
a question.
Go ahead.
When going back to the spies, does it say specifically that they were men, or is it possible that some of them were women?
They were definitely men.
Definitely men.
Unless yes.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think the rabbis were only using that to prove the number 10. There were other things that they were thinking about, to address issues of gender. But maybe not, but the spies were definitely 10. 10 men.
Okay.
Other thoughts, questions?
Was interesting.
Okay. I would encourage you, there are some interesting articles that have been put online about virtual community in this time of coronavirus. My colleague, Rabbi Harris, had a beautiful article. So if you just hit, Jewish, if you just typed in Jewish virtual community, Rabbi, R-O-B-B-I-E, Harris, you would find it. And I think it was really well written because it talks about how important it is spiritually for us to find community. So this was a more, I suppose, legalistic view. Although it does make us think about, what is community? Is it being in physical proximity, or is it listening and hearing? And the rabbis, I can't tell you, the rabbis clearly believe that both together would be normative, but it may be a chicken and egg question. Did the rabbis believe physical proximity was important because hearing and seeing were critical? Or did they believe seeing and hearing were important because physical proximity was critical? So I don't know the answer to that.
Well, there's one thing that might distinguish, which is the idea that it has to be light enough to see your neighbor for amot, that you could be close, but if you couldn't see them, that still didn't count.
Yes. So that is, so physical proximity is not enough alone. It also, it certainly begs the question, we all know that virtual community, for all of its blessings, has its limitations too. When you daven and people are responding, there are all sorts of time lags. And it's hard to hear, and then some people aren't on the video, and some people may be muted and other people not. So I think for our purposes, it's sufficient, but from a Jewish perspective, virtual community may be necessary when it is, but will always be secondary to being able to be present, or as the old AT&T commercial put it, long distance is the next best thing, and you can't be there. So thank you all for joining this evening, and Yasher Koach to you.
Thank you,
There
Rabbi.
is a virtual service coming up next for those who would like. We'll be closing this meeting room, but I invite you to stick around. You could even help make a minyan. Who knows? And I'll see everybody soon, I hope, and wish you a great week and a good night.
Thank you,
Take
Rabbi.
good care.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone be well.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah. Oh, there we go.